Okay, we're going to look at the working memory model now. This is by Baddeley and Hitch in 1974. So progressing on from Atkinson and Schiff in 1968 multi-store model of memory, this memory looks at short-term memory but in a lot more depth. It breaks it down into different facets. So the key components are the central executive, which is a bit like the boss of a company, the director. And as the boss, you can tell the departments what to do. So the phonological loop and the visuo-spatial sketchpad, they are slave systems that deal with either acoustic information or visual. And they work well when you're doing one task from one slave system and one task from another. In the year 2000, they added the episodic buffer, which helps with the binding of all the information. So, like I say, the central executive is also called the boss. This oversees the other systems and it kind of directs attention and manages tasks. So, working memory is a bit like a central workstation. It's active processing. Okay, it's mainly involved in decision making and solving problems. The visuo-spatial sketchpad deals with the visual and spatial information, helps us to understand spatial relationships between things and also form and color. The two parts to the visuo-spatial sketchpad is the visual cache and inner scribe, and they deal with form and color and spatial relations. And the phonological loop, also known as the inner ear and inner voice, has the phonological store and the articulatory control process. Now, the visual spatial sketchpad is referred to as the inner eye, and the phonological loop, the inner ear and inner voice. The central executive is known as the boss. So you've got these two slave systems that can deal with different types of information. Now, the theory is that you can do one task from the phonological loop and one task from the visuo-spatial sketchpad absolutely fine with no interference. If, however, you do two tasks from the same slave system, it kind of struggles to cope with it because it's got a limited amount of resources. So you'll find it difficult to, for example, do a visual task and another visual task at the same time, or a phonological task and another phonological task. So, for example, you find it difficult to read a paragraph of text while at the same time saying la, 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 because it overloads the system. So that's the model as a whole. So you've got the central executive, the phonological loop, visuo-spatial sketchpad, and then the episodic buffer. And there's also links to long-term memory from each one of those. So Baddeley and Hitch came up with this idea of the working memory to expand on Atkinson and Shiffrin's model. It's a bit more dynamic in terms of processing, and like I say, it's like a central workstation. And the way to test the model is to use what's called dual task paradigms, where you do one task from one slave system, one task from another. One of the flaws with the model is that the boss, the central executive, it's very hard to measure or test that in research. Now, in terms of the phonological loop, there are studies that you could look at on what's called the word length effect. So the longer the word, the longer it takes to repeat, which means the word length has an effect, whereas shorter words are quicker and easier to say. So it's obviously easier to learn those. In terms of the visuo-spatial sketchpad, they do some studies where you have to follow light with a pointer while also at the same time describing the angles on a letter F. And if you do two tasks from the same slave system, it struggles to cope with that. And nowadays they are doing research using brain scans, which are a bit more scientific because you can actually see which areas of the brain are being activated while you're doing the task. So the strengths of the model, It's a lot more in depth than the multi-store model of memory. It's got practical applications. You can use it for multitasking and things like that. And also they use a lot of this working memory with athletes and also with things like pilots who've got to do more than one thing at once. The downside is the central executive, which is the main sort of key component. It kind of lacks empirical evidence, and it still requires some refinement as a model in terms of full operations of it. But the episodic buffer did help to solve the binding problem, and that helps to explain how we can bind all this information up to form an image in our consciousness. So overall, it's a lot more depth than the multi-store model, and it gives practical applications in terms of how to test the slave systems, which is quite easy to do using a dual test paradigm. But the other parts are quite difficult to test. However, with brain scans, it might be more an easier way to develop some kind of evidence for it. So thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next slide.